Bonnie and Clyde. We know them as the star-crossed lovers who enjoyed robbing banks and vowed to be free or die together. Pop culture has made them into anti-heroes, but we have some surprises for you.
Let's dig into this. Bonnie Parker's father, a bricklayer, died when she was just 4. Her mother took Bonnie and her 2 siblings to live with their grandmother in Cement City on the outskirts of Dallas. Despite all the changes the family faced, Bonnie did well in school and was reportedly quite intelligent, but she was now on the other side of the tracks from their previous life.
It was near the area that would come to be known as the Devil's Back Porch, and for good reason. People who had nowhere else to go ended up here. The area was a mixed bag with poor neighborhoods, abandoned buildings, and a squatters area where people camped or built shacks or lived rough if they had to. And there were a lot of crime. Incredibly, Clyde Barrow would also spend his childhood in the same general area, although the two would not meet until years later.
Clyde was one of 8 children in the Barrow family. They were extremely poor. Neighbors would later say Clyde was fascinated with guns and loved pretending he was Jesse James. By the time he was 12, the family had moved to the Dallas slum called the Bog in the Devil's Back Porch area, living underneath a wagon until they got a tent. Later, they moved to an abandoned house, and Clyde went to school. He would be committing crimes with his older brother Buck a short time later.
They're often grouped with other famous outlaws from the era like Dillinger and Pretty Boy Floyd. But the Barrow gang was not in the same league as far as bank robbing was concerned. Bonnie and Clyde hated robbing banks, which took time and planning, and they weren't very good at it either. Unlike the big time bank robbers, Bonnie and Clyde never got more than $1,500 in a bank heist.
What Bonnie and Clyde had was sex appeal. They were young and good looking and dangerous. Photos of them, clearly in love, made all the papers. And the romantic idea that they were wild and free and happy in the bleak era of the Depression made them rock stars.
Clyde Barrow loved music. He taught himself how to play guitar as a kid and a saxophone years later. He never had a chance to be a big time musician, and his older brother Buck was making some money stealing cars. Clyde joined him, and his fate was sealed. But he reportedly kept his old guitar and saxophone with him until the guitar was lost during a shootout with the police.
Bonnie was a performer from the start, and she told family and friends they'd see her name in lights one day. She was in school plays and pageants and would sing in talent shows. She loved going to the movies and reading movie magazines. In fact, stacks of the magazines were found in the cars she and Clyde stole and places they stayed.
They did become stars, but not how they imagined. They loved to take photos of themselves and reportedly had great fun setting up scenarios. In one famous picture, Bonnie can be seen with her foot up on a car bumper, gun in hand, and a cigar in her mouth. In another, she holds a gun on a smiling Clyde.
During a police raid of their Joplin, Missouri hideout, April 13, 1933, undeveloped film was found. When it was developed, there were photos of Barrow gang members Buck and Blanche Barrow, W.D. Jones, and of course Bonnie and Clyde. Photos were released to every major newspaper and true crime magazine in the country. Some of Bonnie's poetry was found and published too, and Bonnie and Clyde were indeed famous.
Bonnie Parker died with a wedding ring on her finger, but there were never a Mr. and Mrs. Clyde Barrow. Bonnie was already married when Clyde met her. In 1926, just 6 days before her 16th birthday, she married Roy Thornton, a small-time crook who spent a lot of time in jail. She fell hard, reportedly sporting a tattoo on the inside of her thigh with two hearts with the names Bonnie and Roy. By the time Thornton was sent to prison again for robbery in 1929, Bonnie had had enough.
She met Clyde just a few months later in January of 1930 and fell head over heels for him, and they were reportedly inseparable from that time on. Bonnie knew Clyde was trouble, and she knew their end would be bloody, but she also said and wrote that they would go down together.
In 1930, Clyde was sentenced to 14 years on multiple charges of stealing cars and robbing stores. He was sent to the notorious Eastham prison farm. He escaped using a weapon Bonnie smuggled in for him, but was captured and sent right back a short time later.
He spent almost a year and a half being beaten by guards, starved, and repeatedly abused by a fellow prisoner before he decided he couldn't take any more. He either chopped off two of his toes with an axe himself or had a fellow inmate do it for him. It didn't get him out of prison, but his mother did. She had been petitioning for his release. Just 6 days after his toes were chopped off, Clyde walked out of jail. His balance was never the same. He could not drive a car wearing shoes, and he walked with a noticeable limp for the rest of his life. It was said Clyde went into prison a boy and came out a rattlesnake, but he was a rattlesnake with a limp.
The couple had already been on the run for a year when Clyde missed a road construction sign and flipped their car at high speed into a ravine in Texas on June 10th, 1933. Reports vary on whether it was the battery acid or a gasoline fire, but Bonnie's right leg was burned from the hip to the ankle so badly that the gang thought she would die. Some gang members said it burned down to the bone.
It was too dangerous to take her to a doctor or a hospital, so Clyde took care of her, reportedly using baking soda and stolen drugs. For the rest of her short life, she could barely walk, hopping on her good leg most of the time. Clyde carried her when necessary.
The Barrow gang robbed a total of 14 banks, some of them more than once. In one bank robbery, they got a total of $80, and it was way more dangerous than robbing their favorite targets. They robbed gas stations and small mom and pop stores. Some reports say they would even break open gumball machines when they needed money. Because they committed so many small robberies, they were pretty easy to track.
The FBI says Bonnie and Clyde murdered at least 12 people. Other sources list between 9 and 14 lawmen killed by the couple. Many of the killings happened when they had to shoot their way out of a robbery gone sideways, or were confronted by police. People who knew Bonnie and Clyde later said Bonnie never shot a gun or killed anyone, and the FBI officially called her a willing accomplice, not a murderer.
The Barrow gang kidnapped more people than they killed, usually when stealing a car for a getaway, and they stole a lot of cars, including the one they died in. Clyde reportedly gave at least one of the kidnap victims money to get back home when he dropped him off on the side of the road.
By May of 1934, there were 16 warrants in 4 states for robbery, car theft, assault, escape, and murder for Clyde Barrow, and the law was closing in. A 6-man posse made up of Texas and Louisiana officers knew the gang's movements, thanks to gang member Henry Methvin, and they knew Bonnie and Clyde would be coming to Methvin's family farm to pick him up on May 21st. The posse set up an ambush and waited.
The couple didn't show up on the 21st or the 22nd. Early in the morning of the 23rd, the posse had Methvin's father set up his pickup truck on the side of the road to look like it had broken down, and waited again. And Bonnie and Clyde came down the road. slowing down when they saw the truck.
Between 150 and 160 rounds were fired from 6 different positions. The first shot hit Clyde in the head. He died instantly. The car kept rolling, and the posse kept shooting until it came to a stop. And then they walked up to the car and reportedly shot some more.
Bonnie was still holding half a sandwich. The official coroner's report listed 17 bullet holes in Clyde's body and 26 in Bonnie's. But it was hard to tell, and no official autopsy was done. Undertaker C.B. Bailey reported later that there were so many holes in both bodies, it was difficult to keep embalming fluid in them.
When word of the shooting got out, people ran to the scene to collect souvenirs. They picked bullets out of the trees and off the road. One man tried to cut off Clyde's ear. Pieces of Bonnie's hair and dress were both snipped off, and people dipped whatever they could into the blood everywhere. Someone even tried to cut off Clyde's trigger finger.
Many folks were surprised to find Bonnie and Clyde didn't live up to the romantic, glamorous, bigger-than-life outlaw standards. 23-year-old Bonnie was 4'11", just a tiny girl weighing between 90 and 100 pounds. Clyde was only 25. He was somewhere between 5'4" and 5'7", depending on the source, and only weighed about 125 pounds.
Bonnie and Clyde intended to die together and spend eternity side by side. But Bonnie's mother had different ideas. She reportedly said Clyde had Bonnie in life, but he would never have her in death. Her funeral was held May 26, 1934, and thousands came. She was buried in a beautiful blue nightgown in the Fish Trap Cemetery in West Dallas, Texas. Due to the frequent vandalism of her grave, her body was moved in 1945 to the Crown Hill Cemetery.
The inscription on her gravestone is surprising to many. It reads, "As the flowers are all made sweeter by the sunshine and the dew, so this old world is made brighter by the lives of folk like you." Not the epitaph one would expect for a famous outlaw. The lines are from Bonnie's poem.
Clyde's epitaph is one he would certainly approve of, and some reports say he chose it himself. It says simply, "Gone but not forgotten." He was buried one day before Bonnie and about 10 miles away. He shares a headstone with his brother, Marvin Buck Barrow, at the Western Heights Cemetery.
The last remaining relatives of the couple have tried to get Bonnie moved to a spot next to Clyde for years, without success. So it seems the couple who vowed to spend eternity together will spend it just 10 miles apart.
We hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
And we'll see you on the next one.